Hello, credit union executives. Welcome to See You on the Show, where we give you up-to-date information on how you can reduce risk, keep key talent, and take a strategic approach to your personal financial wellness. Hosted by me, Doug English, a certified financial planner and former credit union insider with ACT Advisors. My guest on today's podcast is Kendra Rubin. Kendra is Chief Legal Officer at SEFCU, where she provides legal advice and strategy to senior management, manages external legal counsel relationships, and oversees contract administration, regulatory compliance, and advocacy. In this episode, we discuss in-house legal counsel, including its strategic role, implementation, and when your credit union should consider adding in-house counsel. So Kendra, welcome to the show. I'm delighted that you are here today. Tell me, how did you get started working with credit unions?
First of all, Doug, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm extremely excited to be here after a couple of scheduling conflicts. I'm excited to finally make it. So how I got started in credit unions was just a few years ago. I'm not a lifer in the movement by any means. I come to credit unions by way of state government, where I spent many years serving in the New York State Executive Chamber in a variety of roles, both as a lawyer and both as a counselor and advisor. From there, I was introduced to the New York Credit Union Association once I was ready to get out of state government. And I interviewed there to be their vice president of government affairs, which is essentially a lobbyist. And having my background in state government, understanding the legislative process, how a bill moves through the process, the state Senate, the state assembly, the executive chamber, understanding that intricate wheel of state government was really helpful to me as I moved into lobbying. So I understood government, I understood how legislation worked, and credit unions as the subject were new to me. And I started there and absolutely loved it, fell in love with the movement, fell in love with the mission of credit unions in particular, and haven't looked back since then. So it's been an exciting couple of years.
Tell me what it is you're doing these days.
So these days, actually today, Doug, today is my second year anniversary.
All right.
Yeah, with SEFCU, which is a credit union in upstate New York, federal credit union up here. And I am their in-house counsel, which I have been doing now for 2 years exactly, which is very exciting.
And is it correct to say that prior to 2 years ago, that SEFCU did not have an in-house legal department?
That's correct. So not only am I coming into the role, I've also built over the past 2 years an actual legal department and sort of framed out what an in-house counsel should be to a credit union and developed that with my internal clients and been working on that for the past 2 years. It's been really exciting. It's been a lot of work. It's been a lot of learning. I'm learning something every day. We're now, as you know, going through a merger, which has been a whole new level of education for me, which is really, really exciting. And I'm really excited about the years to come. But I am the first in-house counsel here, and it's been a fantastic ride so far. And I'm looking forward to continuing it.
Great. Well, on this podcast, what I'm hoping to capture is your learnings from that journey. I want to have you try to step us back to even before SEFCU hired you and brought you in. If you can kind of speak to what caused the credit union to recognize that it was time to create an in-house counsel position, and then just give us some learnings, your best ideas for how you would do it if you were to think about it again. And of course, talk to our listeners about who should look at that as a step that they should consider.
Yep, absolutely. So our board and our CEO are always looking at what's next, and they're very forward-looking and sort of ahead of their time, I think, as a board and as a CEO. So they had been wanting to bring on an in-house counsel for a while, and I got to know some of the board members and also the CEO of SEFCU through my work at the association. So I had been working with them in a different capacity, essentially as a lobbyist, for a couple of years and got to know the staff at SEFCU, the CEO, some of the board members, and they were just really excited about the credit union movement. And they thought SEFCU was growing to a size, and I think we were about at $4.5 billion at that point, growing to a size where it might make sense to bring in-house counsel to start managing the legal affairs of the credit union. And it's something that before coming to SEFCU, I had sort of assumed was like any other sector, right? Where you have your legal department, you have your lawyers in-house, you work with outside counsel. And that was an assumption that I had made that credit unions were sort of similar to banks. All of the big banks have their legal departments, they have their structure set up, their in-house counsel. That's very common. Credit unions, it turns out, not so much, right? And the bigger credit unions have started to bring on in-house counsel, started to develop significant level legal departments, but the smaller credit unions haven't. And SEFCU is growing to the point where they recognize the value of bringing on in-house counsel. And so that's how I came to SEFCU in particular.
With the need for legal specialization in so many different areas for a credit union, is there a concentration in a particular area that causes the credit union to have enough scale in an area of focus? Is that how you get to the size where you determine, all right, we need in-house counsel? Like, what are the metrics, the drivers around what would cause the credit union to start to consider that?
I think as you become a more complex, larger organization, you start having legal issues. And I don't mean issues in the pejorative sense. I just mean legal matters that you need to handle pop up, right? Whether it's litigation, whether it's increased regulatory scrutiny, whether it's credit union advocacy, and now you're at the size where you can actually make a difference with credit union advocacy and doing legislative process. As the boards get more complex, board governance comes into play. And contracts, obviously, contracts are a huge part of it. We all have, as credit unions, outside vendors. We do a lot of outsourcing with third parties. So contracts is a huge issue. And I think the scale, as you get bigger, you also get more complex, and it just makes sense to bring in someone who sort of sees things through a little bit of a different lens and can help the business along in that regard. So I think that's where they were landing when they decided to bring this role in-house.
At $4.5 billion, so there's a huge amount of scale at that point. I wondered if it was any particular focus in the scale. I asked a couple of CEOs before this podcast what they wondered, and they wondered if the in-house counsel was mostly just hiring the external counsel that was there anyways. Talk to me a little bit about how it actually ends up working.
Sure. And I think now, since I've been here for 2 years, we've grown. I think we're at $5.5 billion now. It's absolutely a big part of it, right? Managing that outside counsel spend, managing the outside counsel relationships. And I don't want to downplay the significance of that because it's important. It's also critical to manage that spend effectively, and having one person doing that, I think, makes that more possible. So I won't say that that's not a big part of it. But there are also a lot of issues that we handle internally through my office as well, right? So most contract negotiations do not go to outside counsel. They're handled by myself and my contracts manager. We use outside counsel for some specialized contracts, which I'll get into. But the regulatory compliance, we have regulatory compliance that rolls up to me, which is not necessarily legal strictly, but I work a lot with our compliance officer, and we try to handle as much in-house as we can. And we, of course, go to outside counsel where we need to. Credit union advocacy and the legislative process is handled strictly in-house. We don't have outside counsel for that. We work with the association. Strategic counsel to the business is another huge part of my role that's not strictly legal. Board governance is also a huge part, which we don't outsource. Handle things on a day-to-day basis, like subpoena questions, and then just other random legal issues that arise on any given day. And where I do look to outside counsel is specialized contracts, right? Like our technology-heavy contracts, auto lending, cybersecurity, where there are attorneys who spend their entire lives focused on this one small sector of the law. And the credit union and myself could benefit from their expertise in those areas. I absolutely rely on my outside counsel for that. M&A. So our M&A work, another one of your friends, Jeff Cardone with Luce Gorman, we're working with him on our current merger. And that's a very, very specialized area of the law, right? So if you don't practice that every day, it's good to have someone who does. Where we have litigation, I will bring in litigation counsel. So I would manage all of our litigation. Thank God we don't have a lot. Oversee strategic direction on litigation, partner negotiations on settlements, et cetera. But As far as litigating the actual case, I would hand that off to outside counsel as well. Our collections attorneys, the amount of that is just too broad for me to handle internally. More sophisticated patent and trademark legal issues that we need to address, I would bring in counsel for those. And again, cybersecurity, which I mentioned. It is managing the outside counsel spend, and it's managing, making sure that they're billing you efficiently, they're billing you consistently, you have a good working relationship with them, you understand setting expectations. But a lot of what I noticed is that I moved from roles where I was one of several lawyers in an office. So in government, I was in counsel's office. It was only lawyers that I worked with. The biggest shift for me moving in-house was I am now the only lawyer, and I have just the business clients alongside me. And that has been a huge, huge, huge learning curve for me because I'm used to talking in legal jargon. I'm used to looking at things through a legal lens. And I've really had to shift my mindset to understand the business and understand what the business needs from that lens, but also be able to translate sort of between what the business is asking. If we are using outside counsel, bridging that gap between what the business thinks they need, what the attorneys think they're saying, and then me sort of sitting somewhere in the middle saying, here's how we can actually do this most efficiently. Here's the question. Here's how I need you to handle it. And here's what I want you to handle it by. So that has been a huge learning curve, is maintaining and creating that nexus between the business, our existing outside counsels, and also myself, making the business aware of legal issues. For the first few months, Doug, people didn't know what to do with me when I was here. They were like, I don't know what Kendra does. I don't know what roles he's supposed to play. I don't know when I'm supposed to go to her with questions. It took some time for people to understand what it meant to have an in-house counsel. Now that I'm 2 years in, everyone is very well versed with the department, and I work very, very closely with all of our business units and all of my quote unquote internal clients. We've been developing that relationship for 2 years, and it's really coming along. But it was a big learning curve for me.
Thank you for that list. Is there anything in particular on that list that you think that credit unions probably don't get because they don't use outside counsel for that? I noticed the strategic counsel was something that was not in my communications with CEOs. They did not put that on the list of things they do externally. So talk to us a little bit about that and anything else you think that having in-house counsel causes you to look at differently.
Yep, absolutely. So the one thing that my CEO regularly says to me when I say I'm the lawyer, I pull the lawyer card, and he says, look, Kendra, you're an executive who happens to be a lawyer, and that's how I see you, right? And that was a shift in my perspective where I realized that his expectation of me is not only to provide legal advice to the business and to my internal clients, but also be a strategic business partner, to understand the business, not from a legal lens, but to understand the actual business, understand and anticipate the needs of the business from both a legal and non-legal lens, and to be able to advise him and the rest of the team on any issues, whether they're legal or business or otherwise.
That's the strategic counsel portion, is the advice on things as an executive, not necessarily as a lawyer. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
So talk to us about the process. The last 2 years, you've been creating this legal department from scratch. So if you would wave your magic wand and go back and do it again, how would you suggest credit unions go about it?
Here's how I did it, right? So when I came, we had the compliance department, we had a contracts person, and they were somewhere else in the organization. When I came on board, they did some restructuring, so they now rolled up to me, and they're fantastic. And I couldn't have gotten as far as I have gotten without either of their guidance. I would have hired myself a legal assistant earlier. I just did recently onboard one, and she has also been a lifesaver for me, just keeping my calendar on track. She's also an assistant who comes from a law firm, so she understands how I think, how I work, what I actually need to get done. She's very good at helping me prioritize. Having that sort of assistant while I'm focusing on building the rest of the department is really helpful, right? Because I want to look at all of our policies over our internal legal department policies. I want to develop legal internal policies. And that's something I need to do, but I also need to help the business run on a day-to-day basis and be responsive to the needs of the business And so bringing on someone who wasn't already dedicated to certain contracts, certain compliance area would have probably helped me do that a little bit more efficiently. I did sit down with each of the C-level executives when I started and asked them how I could be beneficial, how they thought legal could help them in their roles. Because, we really serve as a support function. I'm not driving any revenue to the business. I understand the legal department is a cost center. I've understood that from the beginning. So I've always been looking, how can we bring value and how can we really support the business and make sure we get the business to where it wants to be. So I don't know that I would have done anything majorly different other than probably get a little more support up front, just so I could really focus on the substantive pieces that I needed to focus on.
What have you needed from the executive leadership as far as structure or guidance for you to be most effective?
The executive leadership has just been absolutely fantastic. Every one of the people in our C-suite has been supportive of my role, has been supportive of me. They've really helped me understand how the business runs. Because again, I understand the legal issues and I understand the legal issues pop up and how I would handle them through that strictly legal lens. But my colleagues have really been integral in me understanding how that folds into the business. And well, here's the history behind that. And here's why we did it this way. And here's why we need to do it a certain way. Or here's where we need to land. They've been really integral in helping me develop that context and that color around the legal issues so I can handle them for SEFCU more effectively.
When you talk to your peers, are they generally in credit unions in that 4 billion plus range? Is that the size you're used to seeing legal departments in?
Yep. Even so, those legal departments are relatively small in a different sector outside of the credit union movement, outside of financial services. Their in-house legal departments may be 30 to 50 lawyers, depending on how big the organization is. Credit unions and the other credit union councils that I know and have been introduced to, we run a very lean legal department, anywhere from a couple of people, usually, 1 to maybe 5 to 6 lawyers is as big as I've seen. I'm sure there are bigger legal departments, but generally what I've seen is a smaller, tighter run ship, not a lot of administrative support staff. And so that's where outside counsel comes into play too.
So if you were to tell the credit union movement how to go about building a legal department, so in the first place, you want to be very large, maybe solidly north of several billion. And then the first hire was you, right? So the first hire was the attorney. And then shortly thereafter, you would hire some support for that person and then internally consider who should be a part of that structure. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I also think it makes sense to get a good e-billing system on board right away. That's something that I brought on that helps you manage your outside counsel spend, identify trends, see where you're spending too much, see if you're paying a higher hourly rate than other credit unions.
Is there a savings? Is there some reduction in outside counsel spend?
So there should be. And I think when you initially start, the answer is probably no, right? Because I come on board, I'm the first attorney. I'm now seeing things that other people have not looked at through a legal lens, right? Like they're not an attorney. They don't look at it through a legal lens, but I do. And I say, I think we should look at that. I think we should take a little more interest in this. Why don't we test this? So I think on the front end, likely not, because we're a cost center. I'm developing the legal risk profile of the organization. I'm trying to get a feel for it. But eventually, yes, right? If you bring in-house, the intention is I'm bringing in in-house counsel who has enough expertise and can manage this enough so that there is a reduction in outside counsel spend, either because you're managing outside counsel more efficiently or you are taking on more of that legal work internally as well. So absolutely, that is an absolute expectation.
And is it so great that it actually creates a savings, or it's a net increase in cost?
I would hesitate to land on that definitively one way or the other, just because my role is still, I'm still building my department 2 years in, right? So I want at least another year or so under my belt where I can start saying, okay, we're actually a net savings here, a net increase here. I'm still doing that evaluation. So ideally, that's where I would like to get to. I would love it if I'm not a hard cost center for the organization. But I also think that if you're looking at this, and I get it, right? If you're looking at this through strictly a dollars and cents lens, I understand the concern of bringing on in-house counsel is just going to increase costs. And we're financial institutions. So of course, we're looking at it through that lens right off the bat. And again, on the front end in particular, we come in, identify legal risks that were previously unchecked, which may mean more legal issues to work through. That increases your outside counsel spend, that increases your costs. I get that. But over the tenure of that legal department, it should reduce your compliance risk. It should reduce your business risk. It should reduce your litigation risk. And can you put a dollar figure on that? Maybe not. But it shows by things that are almost not happening. It's trying to prove a negative in some instances, which is difficult to do. But even so, I think a significant part of the value proposition of outside counsel goes well beyond cost savings. It's not just about someone coming in to reduce your outside counsel spend. They are a strategic business partner, not just legal counsel. And so that's how I view my role. And that's been an evolution, supporting the business, not just legally, but from the business perspective. And it's going really well.
So Kendra, any other thoughts for what credit unions need to know about when to think about creating in-house counsel, how to do the best job at it, or just plain how to think about working with outside counsel and doing that most effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Doug. So I think as a credit union gets bigger and the issues become more complex and you're seeing legal issues pop up here and there with more frequency, or as you get larger and there's increased scrutiny, it's a good time to start thinking about maybe bringing someone in-house. And again, it doesn't have to be an entire 10-person legal department by any stretch of the word. I think a lot of these run like me where it's just one lawyer, and it really should be viewed lens of they're an executive who happens to be an attorney, because it's not just the legal advice that will benefit the credit union. And I think it's important to have someone with that lens in and have them in early, right? Because you can steer discussions, you can steer away from risks, you can steer toward more prudent paths for the credit union to take before something goes wrong, or you need to hire outside counsel in a panic. And they can just be an integral business partner as well as a legal partner. It's a really interesting area of the law for lawyers who are interested in getting into credit unions. I think it's sort of, I won't say new territory. The issues aren't necessarily new, but credit unions and their relationship with lawyers, I think is still very much evolving. But it's just great to be part of the credit union movement. I think that's another big factor is I didn't want to go to work for a bank. I didn't want to go into a law firm. I wanted to stick with the credit union movement because I believe in it. And I think it's important to keep it going. And, if someone like me can put forth even just a little bit of value to a credit union that allows it to succeed, then I will consider my job to be done and be done successfully. But I love to do. It's interesting every day. I'm never dealing with the same legal issues ever. So it's fantastic. As an attorney, it's a playground where you can evaluate all sorts of issues and all sorts of perspectives and all sorts of subject matter areas. And you can go as deep as or shallow as you want. And it's just been a great experience for me. And I hope more credit unions do consider bringing on an attorney in-house.
Well, now I know the sign on your door says, "Welcome to the legal playground." We are glad you're here. Thank you, Kendra. Thank you for your insights, for your work in the credit union movement. Hopefully this will help other credit unions to make a successful decision in whichever direction they go with regard to in-house counsel. I will look forward to our next recording, which we'll talk about in another month.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Great to talk to you.
That's all the insider credit union knowledge we have for this episode. Are you enjoying the conversation? Be sure to subscribe and share your thoughts with other credit union leaders by leaving us a review. See you next time on See You on the Show.
The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual security. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your financial advisor prior to investing. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. Indexes are unmanaged and cannot be invested into directly.